Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 353 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to come up with a plan to make tier 8 modules. Enjoy. It's honestly going to be very similar to these other setups we did, just potentially smaller. How much smaller, though, we'd have to see. And we did a decentralized setup here where each setup, like with productivities, made all of their own components locally just because of belt limitations. But now that we have purple belts and with better productivities, we might be able to just have like one unit making like the integrated circuits, for example, and then those would just feed into each setup. That would make this thing a lot simpler if we didn't have to have, you know, unique builds for each side, because this is huge. This is just for the tier 5 modules right there, and I would really like it. I don't know if it's going to happen. I would love it if it would fit right here. Because this is like the last thing we would need to put on the circuit bus, short of making the circuit bus bigger, like for example making more blue circuits. So if we could make it fit in this spot, I would be really happy, because I don't want to do another turn again. And we basically have everything we need for the better modules. And it's kind of a little annoying where the Tier 6 module just requires solder and integrated electronics, the emerald, and of course more contacts and the processor boards. And they're like, oh, that's easy. But then Tier 7 requires also the CPUs, and of course more of everything, and also topazes. And then Tier 8, they're like, nah, we're going to make you put transistors in there too. So at least we don't have to make the resistors for this. But nonetheless, the idea is kind of the same. Well, eventually a train's gonna get here. Let's just charge our character for now. Batteries stay mostly charged, it doesn't really matter, but it's always nice to stay charged. Alright, well, this is the moment of truth with Hellmod, because we need to figure out how big this whole thing's going to be. Just checking out all the modules again. The speed module 8s go into spaceship parts and personal equipment. Efficiency 8s go into spaceship parts, personal equipment, and productivity 8s, same thing, but the pollution producing modules don't go into anything, and neither do the cleanings. So what it means is those two sides can actually be made much slower. We don't need to build quite so many. Like right here, they're all the same size, but this is probably too much. We don't need to do this. The only three that need to be big are speed, efficiency, and productivity. The other ones can be small afterthoughts. Not to mention that these require the harmonic crystals, which completely consume all of the resources, so we couldn't do both at the same time anyway. But let's say our goal is 8, and pretty sure all these setups were designed around 1 per second or so, more or less. But to do this requires 18 boards. But let's see if we can fully utilize all of the crystals that we will have, however many that ends up being. So let's just say 1 for now. It needs a ton of machines. They don't get productivity, so it doesn't matter. So we have speed module 8, but we also need to put speed module 7 into that, and we need to put speed module 6 into those. And then we're going to need 24 processor boards. And none of these module machines use productivities, but this one can. So it goes from needing 24 crystals to 9.6 with all productivities. But the pollution is 16.25, so if we take one of them out, it goes to 9.63, which is way better. And it's probably diminishing returns by putting additional pollution cleanings in there. To an extent, yes, it certainly helps, but let's start with just the one, and that gets us down to like 10.67. And what do the numbers look like? Well, we would need a lot of integrated electronics, and if we needed to do 3 of these builds, we'd have to multiply all these numbers times 3, so the only one that wouldn't work is electronics, but we could just have 2 belts for that and make that work. So yeah, in this situation, I think it would work pretty well. Let's see how big the actual build would be. And these would probably be direct inserted, so there's no point in doing it in any other way. Let's just make sure we have the same number of machines for each side, and if we do, let's put a pollution cleaning in there. Well, it's kind of a lot on this list here, so it's kind of messy. But as far as making the modules, we had way more. 10. So it would go from 10 to 5. So that would help. And then as far as these boards, we would need 100 machines. And we have about 100. So it would essentially say the same size for here. But then what about all of these other components? So this part is going to be that same size. So we'd essentially need to build 3 of these at the bare minimum. And that's like all of that space. It's not looking good for the electronics bus here. Although it could keep going this way if we just moved this track up here and then it would come down and then that would connect. So the bus could continue out to there. So in that sense, yeah, we could put 1, 2, and 3 of these here. And then what are we looking at? Well, we need to figure out how big these supporting components are. So first, let's make all of the module types, and we'll worry about pollution producing and cleaning at the very end. It's kind of annoying that we have to do all this stuff over and over because the recipe is just slightly different, but okay, that should be all of it. So then when we back out, we find the total numbers, and we can just kind of safely ignore solder for now. First of all, let's double check that things like the gemstones will be fine, because we're going to need 3 a second. So what does our setup down here do? Actually, just barely, but it does. So this gem setup will keep up. Well, the biggest thing will probably be module contacts, because those are made in a standard assembler. So I guess the question here is whether or not we put the productivities in there. Because with speeds... Okay, the window wasn't jumping. Well, okay, now it's good again. Weird. Well, speeds would make it very small. Small enough to where we could put some pollution cleanings in there. Or productivities. And becomes relatively large. Not that these resources are very difficult to make, but they do help. They reduce the requirement by half, which is not nothing. So how about we do 5 and then the pollution cleaning in there? That would require 40 machines. And how big were the setups here? About 40 machines. Not quite, but close. So let's just do the rest of the calculations, where we need the coil choppers. And they also get their productivities. So we'll give them all of those, and it's more than enough. So we should probably drop 1 out and do pollution cleaning. And in each of these setups, they'll probably make their own solder, however they manage to. So let's make them at each setup. So now the solder's taken care of, we just need solder coils. That's actually quite a few coils. 23 a second. This is going to use almost our factory's full output of solder, which is unexpected. But the module contacts numbers are small. So let's go with the next thing that's probably going to be the biggest, the integrated electronics. Well, without productivities, we don't need very many of them. But with productivities, we do. So what does 60 look like? Well, each setup has one of these, and that's actually 44. So pretty much just one of these. We might have height limitations there, but another thing we can do is put all of these components down here where there is less of a height limitation, because if we look at this, where it just barely fits in there, it has lots of extra space here to expand down. So maybe down here we would make all of the components. But 60 machines is perfectly fine. It would need the wafers, and we'll do the same thing of getting rid of 1 productivity, so it goes from 24 to 13. And it needs to make its own insulated wire, which is relatively easy to do. The next thing that's big is the CPUs. Productivities needs the choppers. And these numbers are not that big anymore because we have faster belts. And that's the CPU. All those numbers are reasonable. Next biggest thing, man, that's a lot in that list, but the processor boards. This setup is probably going to be pretty big. Yeah. 133. what does that look like? Well, this right here is actually 70, so it probably could be the same thing, just taller, but this over here would be how big it would be. And I think that's reasonable too. So basically, instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, having all this stuff, it would just be one of them. So I'm really hoping everything will fit right in there. So perhaps when we build this, before actually hooking up all of the belts, we should make sure that each machine actually fits in there. But otherwise, the numbers are reasonably small. So just do the same thing. And I have been pleasantly surprised that these numbers haven't been too crazy, because my biggest fear in the early days of the factory was it wouldn't be big enough. So when we got to the end game needing things like tier 8 modules, what happens if it was just too much for the factory? Then we'd have to rebuild huge sections of the factory just to support this one thing. You know, that it's actually a pretty big resource hog, but I'm quite thankful that it seems like it's going to work out fine, because this isn't going to be the only thing in the factory that's going to be running. You know, we're going to be building rockets too. But now we're down to the transistors. So same thing. And yeah, 5, 6 machines, that's perfectly fine. So now we're back out. It looks like there's a lot of resources going in and out of this, but these are all things that are just going to already exist. Like, we already have gemstones. Of course, we already have the previous tier of modules. We now have the crystals themselves, and all that other stuff is just base resources, and it's already on the electronics bus at that, so we won't need to do anything. So that's cool. And then we want to do pollution cleaning and pollution producing. We'll basically be doing the same thing, it's just the scale of it will be a lot smaller. The only thing we'll actually need to build is this part of it, and instead of going for 1 a second, we would do significantly less, like 0.1 a second. So it would be essentially 1 machine into each, and then a couple of machines off to the side, making the correct boards, and that could fit anywhere. So I'm pretty happy with this. Now all we have to do is build it. But before that, I wanted to see if I could remove the agricultural modules, but it doesn't look like that's an option, that it's actually baked in, because you can get rid of God modules, you can get rid of green modules, pure productivity, pure speed, because those are just kind of super OP, that's why I took them out. But agricultural isn't in here, so I guess it stays. And I don't feel like specifically removing it from the mod, so we might as well just keep it. It does require the optimized biome planner, but the previous ones did as well, and actually kind of a lot of parts. So this might actually take a little while to research, but nonetheless we'll take care of them. And this was fixed with the recent update to Science Cause Tweaker, where you can actually put the biome planners in there now, so you don't have to cheat them in there. One other thing I did was update the logic to our algae setup, where I basically disconnected all use of fuel blocks except for those delivered by robot, and in fact the only thing it's going to is the backup generator for the uranium setup, and interestingly it is out of power, which it really shouldn't be. I figured it would be okay without a burner inserter, but maybe it needs one after all. Downgrade to burner. There we go. That's basically the only place it goes, but it kind of needs them. All these dumps are set up correctly. The only thing we needed to stop was turning residual gas into synthesis gas, and then just let it fill up to 100% basically, because there's a lot of stuff that's supplied by this setup, like the petroleum jelly, and then we still need propene for our backup glycerol liquid, and basically plastics are being treated like a byproduct. So any plastics it can make gets sent into the system. And this setup also does make our paper, which goes into tier 1 circuit boards, and actually the biome planners too. So it needs to be partially hooked up, but for the most part it's going to be quite dormant from now on. And it looks like this finally got its power. So backup power is online again. The reason why it needs it is because when Logic shuts this off, it's not connected to the network anymore. And it is connected again because power is low enough, but it kind of cycles between being connected and not. So it needs this backup generator to stay online when it's not actually hooked up. It looks like plutonium's gonna fire up again, but we still got Tons of fuel cells left over. So we want to check to see how many belts we're actually going to need. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's reserve those. These setups are probably going to be bigger and taller than the ones making the modules, so they should probably go here so they can extend quite low. And I think the parts that are actually going to make the modules are going to be relatively small. Here's our 6 spots. Something like that. Since we're at the end game and end of the bus, we don't really need to reserve any slots anymore, so we can just use whatever's available. There's probably no difference in the orders here. That we're going to make each individual component first, and then we will make the processor boards, which will then feed into all of these. Or the processor boards could be separate too. They don't have to be right next to each other, but we'll see. We know these ones are going to be separated. So do we copy something or do our own thing? Well, the basic design is the same in the sense where we have 2 choppers on the bottom and then a bunch of machines. So if they were just a little taller, it would fit. Not sure we should line everything up, but I kind of want to push it right on the edge because space might be a concern with these. So we'll do that for now. So that's 34. And actually this is going to need to be purple. Alright, let's get it belted in. In fact, it might be cleaner if this one went up a little bit. And there we go. That's set up, making all the contacts. Going relatively slow, but there's not much to it, so it doesn't need to go very fast. And there go the contacts. And on the bus now. Next one is the big one, integrated circuits. We need basically 2 purple belts of these things. Which setup should we copy? Well, the one that's being used on circuits now is probably the best thing. 1 machine making tinned copper wire, 2 making insulated, which is how it is now. The only difference is we need 6 machines instead of 5 making the wafers. And then we have 44 and we would need 60. So we'll see. It might actually fit. Let's put 2 machines there to figure out the spacing, because then it would go like that. So boom. And we don't need to replace the poles or anything. They're not affecting the size. And they're already high tier machines. So the silicon wafers come in. And that's actually a lot of wafers. So we should do purple. And then in comes our plastic, which we now have plenty of. And we're starting to see our components here. It's nice having longer belts to just skip over things when they're getting a little weird. Next is CPUs, and they might be a little more difficult to copy just because of the differences in scale. Although that said, the concept is similar to these components, where we have the pipes in the middle delivering the acid, and then 2 belts of inputs, only 3 items, but that's how it would be, and then have the outputs on the side, and gold wire coil, which will require less of this, and ultimately less total machines. Yeah, sure, let's just copy it. We'll give it 2 spaces. I would have hoped to see some agricultural research by now, but we're still not getting any. Oh, because we have to pipe them in. Of course. They're not actually on the bus, but they're here. Although it would be a little better if we can do that, so then we'll end up using the whole belt. And we want to avoid these things kind of hopping across, so we'll just adjust this. Alright. We should all basically be researching now. as far as the resources will hold out anyway, and the number is going up, so that's what we want to see. So making a bunch of silicon wafers. So the gold wire's coming in now. And then we need that silicon nitride, which is going into all sorts of things. And making CPUs. Then they actually need to merge into one. Now we need to make the module processor boards, which do go into each of the different board types. And let's see if we have something to copy here. Certainly this number is a lot bigger. And the recipe is very similar to what came before it. It just requires gold now. So actually this setup would work pretty well, with the exception of maybe putting the choppers at the bottom to save some space. I would really rather have all this stuff fit here with us actually not having to move any of this. So we should probably put some work into that. This is reasonably dense right here. So what are we looking at? 70. For now, let's just plop it wherever. Because we could increase the density of this by quite a lot by using our highest tier components. Like, man, that stuff reaches far. In fact, we can get away with only putting one in the middle. But it was already designed with two of them here, so we'll just keep doing that. Now that is an awful lot of stuff. What are we looking at? 142. Alright, this is technically enough. But we need to pick the whole thing up and move it a little bit so we can figure out the choppers. So, robots, please help. Thank you, thank you. Whenever you have one machine, you can do a nice little input belt here. And then output onto the same slot. And then kind of do a split again. That'll be the boards. And then the outputs just kind of go up. Okay. Now that we know its actual shape, let's put it in its final spot. Probably something like that. And that one was pretty close into fitting. But it does. Okay. We should have all of our inputs here. Although these need their recipes changed. There we go. Definitely making the parts now. Okay. One more setup here. This time the transistors. And this setup is going to be quite small. I was hoping it could be a copy of an existing setup. But we may just want to brew something up ourselves because this is going to be a lot smaller than anything that's come before it. And we're doing two choppers, so we can kind of do the same trick as before, where we have one input, one output. And then 6 machines. I think the power pole will reach the whole way, looks like it. Even though it's probably going to be in the range of the substation anyway. And it'll also have an input of plastic. Let's just shoot it in from the other side. And all these numbers are relatively small. And it is just a yellow belt, but let's do reds anyway. And that's basically it. And how about we kind of line it up right there. And there's our relatively modest input. And the relatively modest output. And there's everything we need. Definitely don't want to normally do this because it takes up so much space on the bus compared to its input components, but we're at the end of the bus here, so we can afford to use the space in this sort of way to make the setup simpler. Let's just build it in the space we have available and see what we can squeeze in there. Well, is it going to be any different than these other ones? Let's see, it has 5 inputs, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the output. So in that sense, no. Although we'll probably want to insert them on both sides of the belt. But for now, let's grab this. Let's build something a little fresh. Something like that. We could get better use of the substation by doing one more line of machines, but how many is this? 67. We may need to. So if we do that, that makes pretty full use of this. Might be able to do some overlaps and get a little bit more in there, but I'm relatively happy with this. And it would be 84. Oh, that actually might be too much. Let's plop that in there for now. We couldn't quite place all of it, but it'll probably be fine. Because that gives us 127, and it's actually exactly 101. Well, I guess it would be 102 if that missing one was still there. And this setup will need a little bit of solder. Yeah, it seems like most of this difficulty is just going to get all these resources in here, into all of these different rows. And we would need to do like 5 of those. Sure seems like we'd have to move some of this around. I think that'll do it. Now let's get these set to the right colors. And get it moved into place. Right there. It'll be nice getting all this lined up, because once it is, we can just copy and paste the same splitter setup for everything else, because it needs the exact same input resources. The only thing that's a little different are these crystals. The blue to the left, because that's the only direction it needs to go. More stuff we're not taking care of yet. Guess it makes sense because we hadn't had gold we had to deal with. And there we go. Hopefully that's everything we need to test this out. Well, we don't have solder, so we'll have to wait a second here, but so far this is looking good. Well, except that they needed CPUs, and instead I gave them transistors, and all these boards disappeared for some reason. Oh, well, that's dumb. There we go. And we're hearing assembly noises, so all is well. And there they are. See, all of these need 8.32, but both of these sides are combining 1. So they actually need something way faster than this, which is sort of tricky. But let's do a really funky inserter here, where it picks up from the bottom because it's going to be right here, and then diagonal it up and insert on the left side. There we go. But it fills it up now. So that's this and that, and the other setups are basically going to be the same. The only thing that changes are the crystals in the boards. The gems actually stay the same. So we can just kind of use this setup, but now we need to make 4 more in each of the colors. And as far as pollution producing, we are making the tier 1 boards. I'm not sure if we're doing tier 2. It kind of doesn't look like it, but I guess we can search. So it would be pollution producing logic board. The answer is no. But we are making 1. So instead of worrying about that board, how about let's do the other colors first, and then when we have max tier modules, we can find somewhere in this setup to do the tier 2 boards and then the tier 3, because there's kind of no point in making tier 3 boards if we don't even have tier 2 boards. And it looks like there's going to be some pipes in the way. Probably be easier just to remove them for now. And now we can copy all of this. In fact, we can even copy this part of the bus right there. Oh, should we mash them right next to each other? Probably not. Because it looks like no matter what, we're going to need some landfill. Unfortunately. I mean, we could put some bridges in here, but we know we're going to need a ton of landfill, so let's just do the landfill. And how far do we want to go? Probably at least until the point of the tracks here. And luckily, we can fly to make this easier. It's a lot of landfill, but we have a lot of robots. They're going nuts. Actually, to be honest, do we even need to move this track at all? Because we just need a little bit more space on the side here, so any bus lines can just hop over the track. Although I don't think we have any buses that have a train track that drives through them. We do have drone paths that go straight through some of our buses, so it works fine. And why move these tracks around if we don't actually have to? Because it's not like we would be able to put anything here anyway. If we move this, it would free up space for the bus. That's the only reason why we'd want to move it, is if we needed some bus lines, but I think we'll be okay. And surprisingly enough, even though there's no robot zones out here, their construction reach is actually long enough. And I suppose it's a good opportunity to check for biter orbs, but it looks like there are none. Yeah. Because there's barely any pollution left. So we do generate pollution very quickly, but at the same time it seems to dissipate quickly as well. So that's good. And yeah, this research is going quite slow. Let's see if we can figure out why it's not going at all. Because the biome planners are missing. Because they don't have any of these ground samples. I kind of remember that was something that we just didn't have very many of. And yeah, they're going. It's just very slow. Let's see if we can buff those machines. But before we leave, let's get the robots busy on this, so we have some nice clean concrete to walk on when we come back. This is definitely an old part of our factory here. Looks like the machine's got some random modules. But let's just go nuts with speeds, since we really have no idea what the balance is here. But we do know we want it to go faster. Wow, even while flying, I can now barely keep up. So we can extend the bus lines down, just so we know where they are. Not that we'll be building much out here anymore, especially with the train tracks right over them. But it'll be nice to know. And now we need one more of these, and that will fit, but let's just give it an extra space so it's cleaner. Probably should be careful where we stand, because trains do come through here. And I kind of want to get all this hooked up, so then we can just hook up these bus lines, and then every single other setup will work. Okay, this will be the yellow boards, the red boards. Hey, there we go. Looks like the research packs got back there, since it is continuing. Although the modules are incorrect. So we've got to update all of these. That's like the perfect dance. Nice. Looks like tungsten is almost as high as titanium now. I kind of wanted to go down there real quick and change that setting and basically force tungsten to always be the target of the crystallizers, because there's basically no situation that we wouldn't want to be making it, because everything else we actually have a reasonable method of producing it, but tungsten, all our methods are bad because we don't really have any. I wonder if we can just do a constant combinator with a giant negative number, like negative 80,000, if that would pull this number down and not just completely break everything. So it definitely worked. Is the output tungsten now? Yeah, it looks like it. And hopefully it didn't break anything on the bus here, because it's also negative, but there's no method that actually makes tungsten, so they shouldn't really care about that number. So hopefully it's good. And we do have ways of dumping cobalt now. It used to be a rare resource, but not anymore. So if it gets overloaded, we'll just dump it into one of those other methods. Seems like these agricultural modules are going to take quite some time. Actually, we probably can buff this up a bit, because it looks like these could take essentially 2 more of these machines. So let's see if we can do some remote building. So we'll give that a little bit to build. Hopefully it's faster. Well, let's get charged while we're waiting. And check on this. Well, looks like they're about to get here. Supply power, and then we can see how it works. Well, no paper. So that's a problem. Yeah, that's because we're pulling paper from one setup, and the rest of these are direct inserted, which is going to make this a lot trickier. Well, how much paper do we actually need? 16.5. Alright, we'll have to take care of that. But this should be ready to go for the 4 boards we need. So we put everything in and watch it flow. And I guess we actually don't even need this last one. I'll just unhook it for now. It's not actually doing anything. But, oh yeah, we needed solder too. So no instant excitement here. And actually solder does kind of have to come through here. But it still can. It's just going to be very weird. So we'd be making the yellow boards as long as we had CPUs. And those aren't going because each one of these is wrong. And I'll just remove this last belt. Probably still just put it back down, but for now, I don't want to remove it because we just don't need it. But making yellows. I think these are the wrong type of red boards. So, there were some bugs. And that one's going. So we needed about 16 or so of this. Well, let's see what we can crank out of this one machine. Well, speed modules are amazing. We're basically getting it now. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to put everything together and make those tier 8 modules. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.